Hello, this is Mark, and welcome to the Code and Bootstrapping podcast. Today we have Phil Strazzulla. Hey, welcome.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me.
This is a bit different since I don't know you that well. I haven't interacted with you much online like I have with previous guests, but you found me through Indie Hackers, and I was interested in your history actually, because I guess maybe just give a quick intro on what you're doing now. You're currently running a startup that's bootstrapped. That's the focus is on
Mhm.
HR. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's called selectsoftwarereviews.com. We basically are trying to be like the nerd wallet or wire cutter for the HR software ecosystem. So if you're the head of HR and you need a new recruiting platform or a new payroll platform or whatever, you can go on our website, read our unbiased, in-depth research on all the different vendors. We basically spend hundreds of hours researching, what are the top six or seven payroll providers out of the three or 400 that exist out there to help people make the right decisions, get budget from their boss, stuff like that.
Gotcha. I'm actually not familiar with NerdWallet, so it's good that you said that much. And how long have you been doing it?
I've been doing this for about a year. So my kind of prior background, I started my career off working in the venture capital industry, doing early stage software investing at companies through Bessemer Venture Partners, working in New York. Went to Harvard Business School, got my MBA, and then I always wanted to start a company. I think probably since sophomore year of college, I interned at this like two-person startup in New York, and I just love the impact that I could have, like the creativity, the ownership, all that good stuff. And so I thought, if I want to start a company, I gotta teach myself how to program. And I've sort of dabbled here and there. We were just talking about that like Monte Python or Monte Carlo simulator that I
Yeah.
wrote in Python to test out a roulette strategy previously.
So
Um,
there were a few really interesting things that you've done. Because I was reading your blog before. I think one that obviously people on this channel will be interested in is the coding and bootstrapping, like bootstrapping a business from nothing. So a lot of people here want to do that. I'm also interested in the fact that you were teaching yourself to program while you were in business school. So most people in HBS, at least, well, maybe it's changed, but my impression was that wasn't the normal thing people were doing.
Not really. Yeah, I think it has changed a little bit, and there's like a cohort of people every year now that take the intro computer science class at Harvard undergrad.
Hmm.
But most people are not doing that. There's a lot of traveling and networking, aka socializing, drinking. Obviously, like a lot of meeting with various entrepreneurs, whatever you're kind of interested in. If you're interested in hedge funds, there's billionaire people that start hedge funds on campus every day you can meet with. If you're interested in startups, etc. For me, I always wanted to take like a bit of a different path because I think that's where you can have a more interesting sort of life experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd had this idea in the back of my head to learn how to program. And in between my first and second year of business school, I moved out to San Francisco to work at a venture-backed company. And the first week I was there, I got really, really sick with strep throat.
Oh,
One of those people who just like doesn't go to the doctor. And I was like, this will get better. This will get better. And then of course I like couldn't move. And so I was sort of like laid up for a week and didn't have anything to do, didn't have a TV because I was subletting this terrible apartment in Haight-Ashbury. And so I just started on Codecademy, like going through the tutorials and started building a foundation that would allow me to eventually like work on projects.
interesting. So had you done CS50 before that or not?
I had not.
So it was just all
That
on your
was
own.
not
Okay.
so exactly. Yeah. So CS50 is, yeah, the Harvard undergrad course that I think is like the most popular course at Harvard. And back when I was in business school, it wasn't a thing to take that. I don't even know if it was allowed. So it certainly wasn't on my radar.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of knew I needed like some sort of foundational knowledge to do this stuff before I started actually building.
So I
So
know
Codecademy was a good way to do that.
I knew a lot of people that were doing Codecademy back when I first moved to San Francisco, like 2013. I knew a number of people that were in a boot camp called Hack Reactor, which was a very good boot camp. But before they went there, they did a lot of exercises with Codecademy, and I noticed a lot of people struggled with it. It was like they learned a lot of mechanical things, like how to write a function, how to, like what a variable was, how to assign things to it. But they kind of struggled because they were all doing JavaScript, but everything they had done had been like inside Codecademy's like pseudo terminal. And so when it came to like actually making a project, something that works, like there was a missing step there. I was wondering if you encountered that and what other resources you used after getting like the very basics on Codecademy.
Yeah, there definitely is. That's actually a really interesting observation and something that I'd forgotten. But you mentioning it like brings back all this pain to me. So what I sort of, and this is just kind of what I came up with on my own. I probably should have gotten like a mentor or something, but I was basically like, all right, now I've got to choose a stack to get good at so I can start building stuff. And back then, this was like 2013 summer. I was like, okay, Rails is super popular. And then there's also all these like Python MVC frameworks, and Python is a thing that they teach at MIT. Maybe I'll get like a co-founder from MIT and I'll need to know how to do Python. And so I ended up like, that was literally my logic. And like, Google's like a Python shop, right?
Yeah.
So, and there was like a guy that I knew worked at Google, and I was like, he would be a sweet co-founder. Maybe I could like convince him one day if I have the chops. And so I just picked Django, and they have a book like how to get started, and it's online, and it basically teaches you how to build a Django app, and it gets you like 80% of the way there, and then you just got to Google, right? It's like programming and doing anything. There's a lot of overflow and Googling, and that's sort of how I bridged like the IDE within Codecademy, that's sort of like this like Fisher Price sort of thing, or at least was back then, to actually getting stuff on the internet.
That makes sense. I think that's possibly what I did as well. Just with I was all focused on JavaScript at that point, but similar kind of deal. So then this was all before you did the VC job, is that right?
This is actually afterwards.
Oh, it was afterwards. Okay, so you did business school. You were learning a little bit of programming then, and then after that, you had a VC job, or was a VC job before you graduated?
I did the VC job, then I went to business school and taught myself to program, and then started a business.
Gotcha. So when you entered business school, was your plan basically to be some sort of technical entrepreneur the entire way, or was that something that emerged partway through?
So I hadn't zoned in on the technical aspect of things. I always had a strong draw towards tech, and that's how I ended up in VC in the first place. And even 5 years before I was actually teaching myself how to program, I was messing around with stuff, right? Like I was writing scripts, I was doing some JavaScript, whatever. And so I always sort of had that as a draw, but I hadn't 100% made up my mind. And then just the things I was interested in, the projects I started working on, just happened to be in this sort of like tech arena.
Cool. That makes sense. So after that, then you bootstrapped your own business. You said in your email to me that you had some things you could share about how to get started if you don't have any money. I think that's something lots of people on the internet are interested in. Maybe most of the viewers of this channel are already employed as engineers, but I think it's still something that people would be interested in hearing.
Yeah, so I taught myself how to program, then graduated from business school, and then it was like, I'm going to start a company. Got 7 interns and like set up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and just sort of started like trying to build this website. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing from basically all perspectives, I would say, in retrospect. And so I think the thing that I had that was an advantage is that I was always trying to figure out from a third party perspective, like how I would coach myself and how I would iterate what I was doing to be successful. And so, the thing that I started working on evolved and evolved and evolved and evolved basically every 6 weeks, until it was maybe a year later, a thing that could be a business, which
Hmm.
was this entity called Next Wave Hire, which is like a SaaS offering for HR teams to help market their company as a place to work. So it does a lot of the stuff that like HubSpot does. Um, and even though I'm based around Boston, I didn't know what the hell HubSpot did because it's just like confusing from an outsider's perspective. But basically, what NextWave does is it helps power the career website. It builds pipelines of passive candidates through email marketing. It builds awareness through social marketing. It does all this stuff that, like, if your head of marketing ran your HR department, they would do. But the HR person doesn't know how to do this stuff because, like, it's just not their skill set. It's not their mentality.
Hmm.
And so that was the first business that I built out of school. And I was able to convince a friend of mine eventually to become a co-founder, who's a bit more technical than I am, and become the CTO. Um, yeah, and it was an interesting experience. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you bring on the 7 interns at the beginning, and what were they technical or were they doing just kind of whatever? Like how did that whole thing work? Because this is actually kind of a unique way to start from everyone I've ever talked to.
Yeah, yeah, and it's unclear if it was the right path or not because a lot of interns, you sort of have like a distribution of interns where the top quartile are like awesome and
Yeah.
they're just like, amazing people to work with and they're going to do a good job. There's like the middle, the next like 50% of people who are just like kind of hanging out. They're not really going to do much, but they're not going to, be too much of a drag. And then there's like the bottom 25% where you're just like, oh my gosh, like I'm spending all my time like helping you write a blog post and it's been like 3 weeks and you still haven't written this 500-word blog post. So there were two technical interns, one of whom was in the top 25%, one of whom was probably in the bottom. Um, the top 25% guy was doing his master's at Northeastern. He's actually a Chinese guy, and he was just a workhorse. Like he would every Friday, he'd be like, "Do you want me to come in tomorrow? Like what time do you want, you want me here?" You know what I mean? Just like amazing work ethic, really, really bad when it came to, programming skills. Like I remember going through his code and I'm like, what is this variable? Variable one. He's like, yeah, variable one is that this, and this, and variable two is this. And I'm like, you can't name it variable one. Like you got to put a name that's descriptive, and you have to put like a comment in this code so somebody else who's not you can look at it and understand the code. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
So
can
even
imagine.
though yeah, it was pretty crazy. But in terms of like how I got these interns, Boston has a lot of schools, and so I just posted on the local Boston College, BU, Northeastern, etc. job boards, and basically said if you want to come work at a startup, hit me up. And there was a bunch of interest, and this was 4 or 5 years ago. I still keep in touch with a bunch of these interns. And one of them actually told me it was the best job she ever had of last
Nice.
month when I caught up with her. Yeah, yeah. So I try to, the pay is not going to be great, but try to make it worthwhile for them in terms of their career.
Yeah. So my first like really technical job was in Beijing, and the pay was not great. I was, I don't know. I mean, I had some skills, but I was pretty weak technically, and was there more for biz dev and being bilingual. But we also had a bunch of interns and similar distribution. Like one guy debugged some problems in an iOS app, like all the way down to the LLVM compiler level, and was amazing.
Oh,
Another guy was like literally just like playing video games in the office, and like the one of the
yeah.
managers was like, "I don't want to have to see you do that,so he like moved
Yeah.
his chair around to the opposite side of the desk so that his monitor wouldn't be visible.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, but it was like they were, I think they were earning like 3,000 or maybe a month or 2,000. It was crazy.
Wow.
That's like was it like a couple hundred US, $300 something like that at the time. So yeah, that's quite a story, and the distribution that kind of sounds very familiar to me. The fact that you stayed in touch with some of them also. So you said you did that startup, or I shouldn't say you said, but I looked at your LinkedIn, and now you're doing a different startup. Did you get any of the same people from the first one to come back with you for the second?
I actually didn't. So basically what happened is like a year and a half ago, we bootstrapped this company to profitability
Yeah, sorry,
and
I
like a
skipped
nice
that.
base of.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. And anything like, so to build that company, like obviously we're writing code that like real companies are going to use and like put on their website, right? Like it's going to go into the CMS, or they're going to create a subdomain and point it at our server or whatever. So it's like, it was pretty interesting because both my partner and I had never really done something like that before. And so I think we're just sort of like learning as we were going. We like refactored everything multiple times because we're just like building just like what you think of as like really crappy, like MVP sort of code. You know, nobody had ever taught us how to write this stuff. And then we'd like learn about something and be like, oh, let's, redo it in serverless, or let's whatever. So that was kind of interesting. Sales, B2B sales, like our first couple of customers were like Dropbox, Nissan,
Jeez.
Monster.com, and we were just, yeah, I remember when we got Dropbox, it was like one of our first customers, and like I woke up in the morning and like my co-founder had texted me because the woman had like emailed us and he had read it because he gets up super early, and I like spiked my phone on the bed. I was like, this is amazing. It was just one of those like adrenaline moments where you're like, we're doing this, we're going to make this thing a reality. And then what's interesting is that we signed up like 10 like pretty large enterprise customers that were all paying us between probably on average like 10K a year sort of thing. And none of them used the product. Like none of them
Whoa.
used the product. Like we were begging them to use the product. And I was like going to the monster.com office and being like, let me log in for you. Let me do this, this, and this. And like, they just didn't get it. Like they got it in the pitch, and then when they bought it, like Monster paid us 25K, and they never used the product because we didn't understand the HR user and what they were comfortable with, what they were uncomfortable with. And so it took us an iteration that probably took like 12 to 18 months to get a product that now we have a 95% retention rate. We basically don't lose customers unless they go out of business. But those first 10 customers, I think one of them is still a customer and they pay us like some small amount of money every year, but everybody else churned.
I was going to say it's both amazing you were able. I mean, it's great you were able to get paid, but on the other hand, I can't imagine people sticking around if they don't even use it. Were all of those customers through direct or through outbound sales?
They were, yeah. So they were people that either cold emailed, or I went to one big trade show out in Vegas and we got this guy who had been in the space, who had sold a company in the space, and he was like a really great mentor for me. And we basically went to this trade show and he got us into all like the cool parties, and we were like hanging out with this, head of HR of XYZ company. And you have a couple of drinks and then you're like, all right, let's do a sales demo next week. Do the demo, get the thing booked. But yeah, it was very stressful. Like it was nice because we were immediately sort of like ramen profitable.
Yeah.
Especially when somebody just like do a $25,000 check. But we were like, nobody is using this thing. And when we got these customers, all of our like advisors were like, all right, now go raise like a $2 million seed round. And we were like, but something's off here. Like nobody's using this product. And I think if we had raised that round, it would have been like a total disaster because we would have just like lit that $2 million on fire basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was one of the big things that like set us on this bootstrapping path because it allowed us to have more flexibility where if we messed up like that, if we didn't have the right product, not that we messed up, we just, didn't have the right thing, we could still course correct and we didn't have to die in order to do it.
Yeah. So with those first sales, do you think, so it sounds like it was all in person, and do you think the fact that you were coming out of a Harvard Business School was a big factor in it? Or do you think someone, say, going to a random state school could do something similar?
I think it probably played a factor. I live in Boston still, and so around here, like having a degree from MIT or Harvard is like, it's not common, but you just know so many people that have gone to these schools, and so you don't think too much about it. But the further you get away from Boston, I think the more it means. And so I think that probably had a lot to do with it, at least getting like those initial meetings, certainly getting that advisor on board helped us that we had that credential.
Yeah, my last place where I worked in San Francisco, I think it was like an office of 8, and I think there were only 2 of us who hadn't graduated either bachelor's or master's or both from Stanford. So it was, it was felt like it was everybody, but I noticed they didn't have as many problems raising money as any company I see anywhere else. So for the given, for whatever level of progress, and some of that's probably because the CEO is good at doing it. But I think there's definitely some internal network thing going on. So after you figured out what you needed to change from your feedback from those customers,
we built it basically like I helped out on the first couple of iterations, and then after probably like 18 months into it, I stopped coding and just like focused on getting us more customers. And my co-founder basically built the rest of the platform.
Gotcha.
The current business that I have, I've started in a no-code way, and am now, as it's progressing past an MVP, going back and basically, refactoring the tech stack, which is like all this, Zapier and Squarespace and stuff like that, into like a much more robust product, because now I know that there's a business opportunity there. But it was an easy way to get started, the no-code way, for sure.
That makes sense, and especially given that you were not, working professionally as an engineer for years first. I've seen people go really far, even with like just WordPress and Zapier, and now with the newer tools, it's even a bit further you can go. What was so you were talking about refactoring or actually rewriting your code? Sounds like your first startup, even though you started with Django, but you still like did a lot of rewriting as you learned about other ways you could build it. And the second one, you started off with no code, and then you still ended up rewriting a lot. And this is something I've heard a lot of people say you shouldn't do. Like it's just never rewrite your product. Like Joel Spolsky said that. But on the other hand, Paul Graham has an essay where he said you should always be rewriting your product, and then you'll understand it fully, and it will be, the right abstractions in the right places, and it will be a really good product. So what's your experience with it? Do you think you overdid that, or do you think the rewrite was fine? I guess the second case was probably a stronger case.
Yeah, I'm like a business guy, like first and foremost, and like that's how I world. I love to write code. Like it's, like the few times in my life or the few periods in my life where I've been like working feverishly through the night, it's like writing code because it's just so stimulating and so much fun. And so I think the Joel Spolsky thing like probably is a warning to avoid the siren call of just like rewriting stuff to like make it better and faster. And I think for the most part, that's right. The times when it makes sense is when it's going to have a tangible impact on your business. And
Sure.
so,
Yeah.
for example, we had to rewrite our code so that people with robust procurement processes would buy our product. Like if you're going to sell something to Nissan, it has to have a bunch of stuff in it that we just didn't have, or has to be written a certain way. In the case of what I'm doing right now, I basically have a website where I do a ton of research, I write a bunch of stuff, people get to it, and I have a bidding engine to do advertising. And the bidding engine right now is like super like spaghetti. You know what I mean? Like there's spreadsheets, there's like all this random stuff. And so for me, the reason to refactor is because there is a tangible ROI in my time savings, as well as my ability to increase my revenue from my existing customers by having a simpler and more efficient and more transparent process to buy ads on my website. I think when people get into problems is when they're like, oh, I learned about this like really cool new stack or really cool new way to do XYZ. You know, it's gonna be faster to like have our, you know, web app and like XYZ stack. Let's rewrite the whole thing. And it's like, well, first of all, do you even have a business yet? Because if you don't have product market fit, like you're just wasting your time. And two, the pain and the risk that you're going to take on to do that, is it worth the outcome? Like, is there a return on your investment? And so that's why I preface this with saying I'm a business guy. That's just how I think about it.
It is. Well, I think that, so I definitely get the point about, you know, the danger of just rewriting something because it's fun or because it makes you feel more impressive as an engineer or something. Though I think there's also another factor that I've seen on indie hackers. I keep mentioning every podcast, but on indie hackers, I see a lot of people talking about really like pretty heavy duty deployment processes or testing setups. And I think some of it is fear, because there's always like this exponentially increasing cost as you want more stability. So on my main site, Alchemist Camp, if it's down for an hour, somebody who wants to find a tutorial has to wait. But it doesn't impact a business they're running, and it doesn't, lose their customer data or, anything like that. So to me, 99.9% uptime is actually enough. And I think there may be, or there definitely are a lot of solo founders who from day one are thinking, I need 99.9999% uptime, and I need like this orchestrated system of fail-safes and fallbacks, and put everything on AWS and use 7 different services, and this and this and this and this. So that I guess the impression I'm getting, and this may be wrong, but it seems like you were just getting like the simplest thing that would work, and you had like a high tolerance for risk, at least at the very beginning, and then maybe your rewrite was driven by something that was absolutely missing. Although I'm guessing maybe your tolerance for risk was also going down. As more people were using it, you were like, wow, I really, have to make sure this bidding engine doesn't do something really strange or crash for a day or something like that.
Yeah, and also when you were talking about these like super robust like testing environments, what I'm thinking is, man, that slows you down so much. And so if you can rewrite your process or your code base in a way that like for example, if you just have like one huge code base, right, as opposed to like microservices, like you're running you're running more risk and therefore have to do more testing before you push code. And so perhaps refactoring your code into all these different microservices is a good idea, because you decrease your risk and therefore you speed up your deployment cycles. And so over the course of, 3 or 6 or 12 months, there's going to be a return on investment there. But yeah, I think this is a good point, and one that you made, I think, around like why the Elixir stack came up in the first place, which is like, telecom, like they need 99.9999999%
Yeah.
uptime, right? But realistically, like, yeah, if your and I's website goes down, like, it's not a big deal. It's like we think it is, but look at if you have product market fit, it doesn't matter. Like, look at how terribly buggy LinkedIn is, like
Oh,
20 years into that business. And
yeah.
it's a multi-billion-dollar company because they have a really unique and valuable data asset. And so people are going to deal with the pain, even though a lot of times like, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, totally. So what's the main portion of the business you're working on improving now? Is it related to better understanding your customers? Is it related to more content, some kind of technical improvement, or maybe getting some kind of network effect or something? Yeah, just what's the main focus now?
Yeah, I think for me, the whole business is the sort of linchpin is can you create high quality, in-depth, unbiased content and still monetize it? PC Mag has like lists of the best applicant tracking systems, and it's basically a list of the worst applicant tracking systems, except those are the ones that are willing to pay the most to be on that list. And so for me, I have to sort of, delete all those emails that I get each month from companies saying how much does it cost to be on this list and figure out ways of doing in-depth and unique research that actually benefits people and then distribute it in ways where they'll find it at the right time. So that's like the thing that I'm thinking about the most, and how do I scale that beyond my own efforts because there's only so many hours in the day. And then the other things I'm thinking about are like branding, like I don't know anything about design or like building a brand, and so I'm trying to figure that stuff out, as well as how do I scale the tech that I already have because it's sort of hitting a point where it's not working to the level it needs to.
How much traffic are you getting right now?
Um, Getting about 7 or 8 thousand people a month to the website.
Oh, okay. So that shouldn't be too taxing. Although you said you've got that bidding engine, so perhaps it's
It's
that
mostly
part.
the bidding engine.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And scale to me doesn't necessarily mean like how many times like an API is getting hit and it's slowing down. It's more from a process perspective, like all the other things that have to happen around customers that need to be automated and need to be done in a very transparent way that allows companies to understand like how the engine works intuitively, etc. I had one of the biggest mistakes I made with this business is one of the companies asked me to basically do like a deal. My first like 2 months of allowing companies to advertise on the site, they're like, "Can we pay you a little bit extra to have this spot for 3 months?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, why not?
Ah,
Like nobody else is responding." And so, of course, like, a week later, one of their competitors was like, "Hey, we want to advertise too." And I'm like, "Okay, sweet. Like this spot's open." They're like, "What about this one?" They're like, they just got upset that that one had been locked down for 3 months. I was like, okay, so there has to be like very defined rules that are consistent across every person.
yeah, that makes sense. So is it just you at this point doing everything?
Yeah. Well, I've basically done this as a solo venture. I've got a couple contractors helping me out with design, with some writing stuff, with some marketing stuff. But I, I guess I wanted to do this on my own. It was sort of like a passion project for myself. My co-founder from the other business is still working on that with this other guy we hired as a general manager. And I, I'm in close contact with those guys. I just am not in the business day to day. But this is sort of a Phil venture for now.
That's pretty cool. So I've just got a couple more questions. First
Yeah.
is you. So you've been working with no code tools, and they've been. I think no code in a lot of ways is a like a marketing term because tools that let you do things you used to code for have been around for a long time. Like WordPress is a really good example. You could even argue that Excel is an example, but definitely some, iOS app tools like Game Salad would fit into that category, as well as, the newer things like Webflow. How would you think about skills to look at if you're hiring someone to do no coding for you? You've been doing it yourself, but if you had to hire someone who was doing the kinds of stuff that you're doing for your startup on the no coding side, what would you look for?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I literally just hired somebody off of Upwork to do like a small project. So I'd have potentially a partner to do some of these things for me. So my process there was, one, looking at like past body of work. Obviously, Upwork has, reviews and like specific projects that people have worked on and the feedback from those projects, which is super helpful. I interviewed the person to understand, one, do I want to work with them? Because I think there's a lot of stuff beyond skills that
Mm-hmm.
is important around communication and organization, et cetera, and credibility as well, especially when you just meet somebody off the internet, right?
For
And,
sure,
and
yeah.
then I think for, for me, like it comes down to logical thinking. So a lot of programming is like not super hard, right? Like you can
Right.
always make some like brute force algorithm that like figures out how to do a thing. But can you think about a system and like logically understand how that system should work in the most efficient way that's good for compute power, it's good for the end user, it's good for the owner, it's good for maintenance. And those are the sorts of things that I want to get into when I'm evaluating somebody. And it's nice if you have a specific project in mind, because then you can just talk about that specific project and how somebody would do it, why they'd use, this API versus that tool or whatever. And if they're making sense and they're aligned with you, then that's great. If they're, trying to sell you and talking about all this like voodoo magic stuff that tries to make you feel inferior, then you probably know that person's not a good fit. And that's why having the skill set is good, to have a bit of a technical skill set so you can sort of understand what's real and what's not, and what's, a lot of money and what's a fair price. So that's sort of how I do it. And I think the best thing is just have them start a project, and after 4 or 5 hours, look at what progress has been made and evaluate their work. And if they're doing a good job, then awesome. And if not, then you just got to move on. But I think that's kind of like the only way to truly evaluate somebody.
I definitely agree with you that even using no code related things, it's still logic. So if someone, struggles with ideas of, if this thing happens, then this does, and if not, then this other thing happens, and there, it'll be a problem with or without, or
Mm-hmm.
with coding or with using someone else's API. Last thing I was wondering about was, how do you think about the opportunity cost of being an entrepreneur when you have a very desirable business degree from Harvard? Because in one sense, it's more expensive for you to be an entrepreneur and start your own thing than it would be for someone who, say, dropped out of school and learned how to code.
Yeah. And I think it's expensive economically. I think it's also expensive socially. And that's a large reason why you don't see too many people taking that path. They're more apt to, raise and go big or go home, because that's sort of what you're brainwashed to do, and that's what the expectation is. I think for me, and especially in the early days of a business, like you're always going to have these second doubts, and a friend of mine just started working at YouTube and is making a absurd amount of money, and I'm just like,
I can
man,
imagine.
like that doesn't seem, yeah, it's like, that doesn't seem too bad. Or, your former colleagues in DC, whatever. I think for me, like, I, in those moments, try to think about, what am I trying to optimize for? And am I going to get to the baselines that I need to get to be happy? So in terms of economics, like, I'm pretty confident that I'll get to the number per year or total net worth that I need to be satisfied on this path.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually not optimized for economics. I'm trying to optimize for my life in general, because time's so short and I've got a lot of other interests beyond just making money. So that's sort of how I rationalize it. And then also, all you got to do is talk to your friends. Like, my friend who just got a job at YouTube, I'm sure when I catch up with them 12 or 18 months into their job, they're going to be bored out of their minds and they're not going to be challenged, and they're going to be like, I want to start another business, because he came from a business where he just started something and it didn't work out. So yeah, there's all this other stuff. And there's all these studies out there that show you only need so much amount of money. I think the much higher cost is the social cost, where you're at parties and people are like,
So what do you do? Yeah.
Did you go to the same party this winter? And you're like, no, I didn't. So yeah.
I can definitely relate to a little bit of that, just leaving, big tech companies in the Bay Area and, being a digital nomad in Asia, working on my own little thing. So, thanks for sharing that. Great. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I definitely didn't have all of the details of your multiple ventures straight in my head, but it's still valuable stuff, and I appreciate you being patient and explaining it all. Where should any viewers who want to learn more about what you're doing, or how you think about this kind of stuff, look for you on the internet?
Yeah, so the website's selectsoftwarereviews.com. If you want to check that out, you're probably not in HR, so you probably don't care about that. If you want to connect generally and talk entrepreneurship or whatever, you can find me on LinkedIn, Phil Strazzulla. There's very few of us in the world, easy to find. I also have a blog, philstrazzulla.com, that I've started 10 years ago, and I've written a bunch of random stuff on there about entrepreneurship or investing or other things that have piqued my interest throughout time.
Yeah, that's great. I will put all those links in the show notes. And thanks again for your time. And everyone else, thanks for listening to the Code and Bootstrapping podcast.